是大几钱，大不是因为是大一个吧，那提前大不是写的什么？
So to repeat where we were trying to show why those two categories or those two attributes of the mind-only school are described as existing deceptively or existing nominally, and we finished talking about how they triggered mentally afflicted things first, and then secondly how they provided the basis for ascription or for labeling, whether it be through the mind, through words, or through constructs.
他也给真的贴了吧？对呢，了，就这样当那么多工作对比，就这样就是要了吧？就这样当对也给贴了，我对也给认定也那么就送出国去了，我呢就这样当，还是就这样当那么多工作都有比，就这样就送多啊。这通过这个就这样现在送啊，就这样是他向往了，我要送起码来，向往了那边，他的向往的结果吧，就想不起来。你把你是明大的，他也多比我，你当他也多比。前面写的区别，他也都有把些对他给清楚了。还是说呢，明当他也记得，他也记大比我，你是那滚大枪啊，他也多比前面写的区别，就是说达到多半年，他可能是呢，就这样过去是向往过来的，向往过去人，明当他也记大比我你给大赛写过来，样子就是滚大枪写的起码。反正他也多比前面写的区别，就是。他也多跟过了，这当多半年级滚大赛系列里面，那弄得那你讲滚大级大系里面，那想过了，想往写瞧我去，他那个主持水度啊，他应该是想往他检查的，他的呢，那你想我老估计应该是，就这样我把这个这个年数区别，我把它写到，我把这个这个年数区别我把它写上，我把这个这个年数区别是那滚大级大系考了写到，滚大级大系我不把它写过。
Jetso Kappa is explaining why on the 6th line on page 57 that obviously we've been talking so far about Shenwangs, right? When we talked about why they were called deceptive reality, why they were called existing nominally, we kept saying referring to the two groups, right? But obviously here so far they've been talking about mostly about dependent things, Shenwangs. Why? On the 6th line from the top, page 57, they call them Gyuten Dang. Gyuten means, we said before, that which exhibits causation, right? Rather than its normal meaning, which means reason. Okay, so if you divide the word here, Gyuten, into two parts, it becomes that which exhibits causation, meaning dependent things. So far they've been talking about mostly about dependent things. And then Jetso Kappa explains that on 57, third line from the bottom, where it says Gyuten, he finds it necessary to explain the word Gyuten because in normal Tibetan, Gyuten means something completely different. It means reason. Okay, but here Jetso Kappa is saying means this word refers to those functioning things which become the locus or the place which are referred to with expression. Meaning here, expression here meaning labeling through ideas or labeling through words. Those two being labeling which is done by a constructing state of mind. And you can also say that Shenwangs or dependent things are the recipient or the basis of labels which are constructs themselves. So it can refer to a dependent thing to which a construct is applied, or it could be a dependent thing to which words and thoughts are applied. Either case, you can call it the object or the basis of ascription or the basis of labeling. And that was the second way in which it was characterized as the basis of labeling.
전담당 조군이 군속세가 랩대 단디 군속세에 군속당 전담세에 남시 리벤 나 직송도 와或者 직장 차가래
맞아.
다 남시 리벤 나라 가르쳐도 지대배 시비 지대비 시에바 투바티기 유루콜라 군속 잼바 지대를 대비 시에바 유루콜라 전담 잼바
맞아.
다음에 지대비 시에바 투비 유루세 지대비 시에바 투바 세고 술라스기를 융아도 대만이 생이 샤가로 꼬나 봐 타니에 지지 테마 니에 타니기 병하고 가네 레도 오서 타니기 지다 독서라 봐 최탐제수 이와를 채는 리기는 채로 와 담바다 담담 대만이 이와를 채로 와 이치 주로 와 군속 담바 콜라 타니 바 타니에스 다 타니 쥐쥐스 군속 담바 가네 레도 내수 제 내수 가네 레도 신이 제 저기 군속 담비 계속 그들이 마보자 이 내수 가네 레신 상무 동게 줄로 돼서 아니 타니 쥐쥐 담아서 콜라 시 지대비 시에바 투비 시에바 투루 바스 다 지대에 대비 시에바스 두자 돈이 무슨 돈이 로콜라 지대에 대비 시에바스 그 유로 콜라 아니 남들 마스 오티 단다 남시에 리페나라 텐데지 뭔지 쳐야 알았어 대치에 가래 강한 삼도잖아 군도 덴바지당 군도다 단담 세하고 조군이에 군도 거다 조군이에 단담 콜라 단담 덴바고 송교 알았어
Listen, page 57, second line from the bottom. We now have a quotation from a book called, you can call it The Exposition of Reasoning, okay? Reasoned Exposition, how's that, okay? So, Reasoned Exposition is a book by Master Vasubandhu again. So we're hearing from Master Vasubandhu again. And it says that it's trying to define what it is to be deceptive, to exist deceptively, and what it is to exist ultimately in the second meaning of the term. Don't forget that we still are getting a lot of cases where people are referring to it in the second meaning of the term, meaning ultimate reality and deceptive reality. Okay, so then here is Master Bandhu's explanation of what it is to be deceptive reality and what it is to be ultimate reality. He starts out by saying that thing which is the object of the mistaken state of mind of the world, right? That thing which is the object of the mistaken state of mind of the world is what we call deceptive reality. And then we go on to page 58. That thing which is object of that state of mind which is beyond the world, or which has gone beyond the world, is described as ultimate reality. Now, what does it mean here to be a deceptive state of mind? Geshe-la describes it as, this is a new expression for us. Tanya Chujeki Rikpa means a kind of knowledge or a kind of understanding which is investigating what it is to be a nominal thing. Okay, the state of mind which is investigating what it is to be nominal is described as a state of mind of the world and a state of mind which is mistaken. It is dealing with deceptive objects. Okay, that's a code word. Okay, investigating nominal things, or investigating what it is to be nominal, is what it is a code word in Buddhism for the state of mind that is perceiving what we call deceptive reality. So Master Vasubandhu says, you want to know what deceptive reality is? It's that thing which serves as the object of a mistaken state of mind of the world. Meaning, Geshe-la glosses, a state of mind which is investigating the nature of nominal things. It's given that code name. Okay, and then the opposite, which is the direct perception of emptiness. Okay, the state of mind which is the direct perception of emptiness, which here is called a state of mind which transcends the world. Okay, which is beyond the world. That state of mind, anything which provides an object for that, is ultimate reality. So here again, in a new quotation from Master Vasubandhu, we have two descriptions of deceptive reality and ultimate reality, which accord to the second definition or the second description of those terms.
말아도 독독으로 치에서는 단이 없다 시작해야 말해. 조군이 언도 집이 전담 대마 인 말때는 전담 대마를 또 조군이 전담을 해. 단담 담바레 민도나 조선이 된단 말이에요. 군도 담바레 또나 조선이 배우는 시고 군도리 담바레 민도 조선이 배우는 군도.
Very, very simply, to put it succinctly, to just wrap it up in a very simple way, that thing which is referred to as ultimate in the second interpretation of that word or of that term is ultimate reality. If something is ultimate reality, then it is what the second way of explaining the word is referring to when it says ultimate. If something is deceptive reality or deceptive truth, then it is what is being called deceptive in the second interpretation of the word deceptive. So that's all, just to summarize.
대 공도 쳐봤지 대만의 군주비 대만 인데 강아 줘봐지 단 저반의 군주비 임에서 저반에 찍도 가봐야서는 손안 되나
네
그전에 이 많이 웅압중압중 그렇게 타마테마
네
그전에 웅압 주비 찍이 내서 주고 웅압을 하시고 가봐시도 쓰는 도에나라 시 샤나바 도에나라 시
맞아
웅압 주비 찍이 내서 줘봐서 웅압 줘봐 세리 갈라 시그리 되나 세리 단지 손안이 군주비 인 가서 저반이 군주비 임에 뒤 공도 주버 체위 담반이 군주비 담반인데 오 독스라 그래 답변은 알아도 니 오마벨 루라잖아 가산티 라바로 오마벨 루 셰즈도 봄바라 군주비 담바 시 식수지 군주 콜라 봄바 담바지 그뭐 담바인다 군주비 담바 나마이마 오 코단 드라보 쳔네 다셈잠 루라잖아요 군주비 담바 봄바라 군주비 담바 세고 가르레 세나 봄바라 군주비 담바 세고 가르세나 댄스 디 댄당코 셈 오마바다 드라보 쳔네 봄바 코랑 봄바시비 다주기 주시를 랑게 쳔이 주바코 투샤님 무슨 로크용 걸 주바 땅시래면도 뭐 내서라 랑게 쳔이 주바 주시를
즉시디 랑게 쳔이 주바마이
기산에 콜라 군조 담바 봄바를 담바 세고 코랑 봄바를 미비 쳐지 당진 저러 이 모르 담바 tam시래면도 전당라 어디 담바 주바 이 모르 담바를 모두 전당을 주기 당 주바지 요 말에 오시아바 인자 엄마도 거다 본이 잡으래 어디 저바 세디 얘기 킨 오 군조 비임베 세디도 군조 담바시 직수 가다 가서 식 나서 군조 담바시 직수 군조 아샤 기 모르 담바 땀나 군조 Page
58, line 3. Now Justin Copper says, what did they mean when they said expression? Okay, what did they mean when they said expression? Japani means, what did they mean when they said expression? What did who mean? Back on page 57, second line from the bottom, we were still in a quotation from the abbreviation of Arya Sangha when we got somebody saying, oh, that functional thing which is the place, or that functional thing which is the object towards which you apply expressions, okay, the words of expressions. And so Jetson Kappa is going into the meaning of the word expression. And he says, expression, what does expression mean here? We're talking about the meaning of the word deceptive. And Geshe-la says, do you remember back in the middle way school when we were discussing the meaning of the word deceptive as a part, as a piece of the phrase deceptive reality? Remember? They were discussing deceptive reality, and the middle way people said, you want to know why we call it deceptive reality? Let's take the deceptive out of deceptive reality and treat that separately. And then they said, oh, something is deceptive when you are deceived, okay? And it means the deceived state of mind. Deceived state of mind meaning the object of the deceived state of mind, right? And that is the tendency to hold things as existing truly. In the middle way school, the tendency which holds things as existing truly is a deceived state of mind. And as it looks on what we call deceptive reality, it is constantly deceived. So that reality which provides the object for the deceived state of mind is what we call deceptive reality. And if you remember, that was how the middle way school explained the word deceptive in the phrase deceptive reality. Okay. Now Geshe-la says here in the MindOnly school, on this point, line 3, page 58, you get a very, very similar description of what it is to be deceptive. And here what they're saying in essence is there's a state of mind also, according to the MindOnly school, which is holding something to be self-existent. How? How do they describe it? Oh, it's looking on an object as the thing which is called that, and thinking that relationship exists by definition, okay? The fact that a certain person is the person who is called a certain name, okay? If that fact could exist by definition, it's the mind which believes that fact exists by definition. Basically that any given person should have and will always be, by definition, given the name they're given, which is not true at all, right? But they think that when they describe a state of mind which is grasping to self-existence, that's what that state of mind is thinking. It's thinking that this thing, which is called this, is called that naturally, or by definition, okay? From its own side, okay? Nothing made up about it, okay? And that state of mind is deceived. And that's what we mean when we say deceptive reality. So here is a case where the mind-only school is describing the deceptiveness of deceptive reality in a very similar way to the middle way school, except what they say, how the deception takes place, is different, right? But they're in both cases, deceptive reality is named after the state of mind which is deceived. Now how it's deceived is different in the two schools. But the deceptiveness of deceptive reality comes from that the same sort of description in both of the schools. Nothing. Okay, we're going to check in with you guys. Okay, ready? When the middle way school talks about the word deceptive in the phrase deceptive reality, what are they talking about? How do they describe it?
Incorrectly perceives the word deceptive in deceptive reality.
Right.
The mind that apprehends things to be ultimately existent.
Umape lugla kunzoki tsikso gyube kunzop seandi denzing ngwa kande tubati dires dendampar yoba dires dendampar tupan digi yu kanyembadi kunzo demares. Mane kunzob demba sek 6 gyube kunzob di shepa dila jagyones trube shepa dila jagyones. Nani. You guys agree or not that the deceptive in the phrase deceptive reality, according to the middle way school, is referring primarily to the state of mind which thinks that something is existing by definition when it's not existing by definition. Agree?
Yeah.
They all agree with you. So it says that he can eat lunch and the rest of you don't have to eat lunch, and your tummies will get filled too because you're all one mind stream. Carry the same logic, right? Carry the same reasoning over to the mind-only school. Now, in the mind-only school, when you talk about deceptive reality in the mind-only school, and if you were in the mind-only school and somebody asked you, well, what does the deceptive and the deceptive reality mean? Carrying that logic to this new school, how would they describe it?
As the belief that the thing that bears the label does so by definition that it has to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
As the label, the flask is not merely labelled a flask, it's inherently exists as bearing the label flask. By definition.
You want to say it the same way?
He said that the mind that meant the same thing.
That the label of the object exists by definition.
That isn't how he said it.
No, you said that the deceive meant the same thing in both schools.
No. You said the principle was the same, but the meaning is different.
It's the mind that perceives an object. Perceives that an object has to be called what it's called.
Right, good. That a thing should be the object of what it's called by definition. Which means that, a potato would always be a potato even no matter who looked at it. Karishu, tane bumla chane bumba shebe tsiki bumba de tane jubi juche yimba nakitani ki dupa zimbe lo dila kunzob se so sem sambe look shisha chena kunzob dembe 6 to give kunzob de shebala Chushelia Sigures. So he says, you agree now that, it's like parallel description, right? It's a different meaning, different content, but the way in which they describe it is parallel, right? So we'd have to say, so to this state of mind, right, in the mind-only school, to which something is appearing as though it were by definition the object which was given its name. All right? That when that appears to it, that is appearing to exist by definition. And that's what it means here to be deceptive, right? And that's the main point here. Okay, so if that's that appearing that way, it appearing to exist by definition that way, is what it means in this school when they say the deceptive and deceptive reality. And even though it appears that way to that state of mind, it doesn't exist that way to that state of mind. How's that, he says? Can we say it that way? Yeah. Yeah, okay? So it appears that way to that state of mind, but it doesn't exist that way to the state of mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, there's two little points that you could say.
Okay, what?
Well, earlier we talked about the fact that it's deceived with respect to thinking that the object and the subject perceiving were different, and also it's deceived with regard to thinking that the object is external. But those 2 points came earlier, that at least...
Da semtabe luk shishache. Kunzob demesek tsitsurgi gyobe kunzob de la chushe chi shishache. That chushe di kare zingyore sena bomba shepe tani jubi jushi yimba rangi tani ki juba zingyores. That those chena kande do. Bomba di chiru dundu juba zingyores. Yangna bomba dam bomba tope mikin number shepe ni zay shengi zay shengi tomba. Zay shengi juba di nishana kandidus. Same thing. It's a good point, he says. You could have said it any way of those 3 different ways. He said, fine. In this school, you could have said it any one of those ways. But the reasoning is parallel, right? What Dr. Chilton has just done is taken one of those multicolored pens, and first you put down the red and you wrote A. And then you flop that up and put down the black and wrote A. And you flop that up and put down the blue and wrote A. It's a red A and a black A and a blue A, but it's really all the same, right? Yeah, you're right. It's all the same thing. Okay. We can posit 3 from what you said. We can also, go further and say there are 3 kinds of totality, or 3 kinds of emptiness, right? One is the fact that something is what it's named doesn't exist by definition. Okay. One is the fact that objects don't exist externally. Okay. One is the fact that the consciousness which perceives blue and the blue which that consciousness perceives are not coming from different karmic seeds. Okay? Those 3 are 3 different flavors of emptiness in the mind-only school. And the 3 states of mind which hold the opposite to be true in each case are corresponding 3 flavors of what it is to hold something to be self-existent. The tendency to hold something as being self-existent, which in this school is the ultimate, which in Buddhism is the ultimate problem. Okay.
kunyi mo di min kha ka shora ma to thanda chi bi ane bi ane ma shiro to trup se ne site ye ko samlo ko to tablo da lo lokshi shora shiro to to pumbate pumding ni chi dang o chi pa re me du be to khora be lo ga chi khora nu rang ge khora to to jing ar so re tu de chamya mang bu san to to se le sha ni mi che dang o chi ji mi sing gi yo ta ti si kha ka shora thanda chi bi.
And even more than that, Dr. Chilton, there's a sort of an intimate relation between the two. To hold one is to hold the other. I'll give you an example. If you think that any given object exists as an external thing, right, then essentially what you're saying is, oh, this thing exists external to my perception as some kind of object put together from partless atoms out there, you know, and does not enjoy some indivisible relationship with my visual consciousness. So in that sense, you're saying exactly the same thing in those two cases. The ignorance which holds that the blue which you are perceiving and the state of mind which is perceiving the blue do not come from the same karmic seed, and the ignorance which holds, that piece of stuff out there that's built out of its own partless atoms could never be somehow intimately connected to my consciousness, you know, they could never bear some kind of indivisible relationship or something like that. So they're not only close to each other, it is saying the same thing actually.
Wala demba rema to ngoi ne to ngoma chana demba ta demba se di rangi rangi to pi rani ji bida ji juki rangi thing thuwa ko na to ko na la ko o thi ngoro rangi thing ji thuwa tam si le ma to ngoi ne to na ma to ga inda thi ngor demba tam na sa ti kun to thi ngor demba tam na sa ne kun to demba mean ta.
So we've covered the meaning of the word deceptive, right? It means to that deceived state of mind, this thing appears to be such and such. Okay, so for example, when this state of mind in the mind-only school is looking at a thing like a water pitcher, it is at that moment holding that the water pitcher is something which, by definition, deserves the name water pitcher. Okay, is something which, by definition, deserves the name water pitcher. It is holding on to that. And it believes that to be true. Okay? That deceived state of mind believes that to be true. You can say it's true to that state of mind. Only. So only that object which is true only to a deceived state of mind is what we can call deceptive reality. That object which is real, or which is reality, only to a deceived state of mind. Now you've got both parts of the term. That we call deceptive reality. So the reality only means real to that wrong state of mind, and the deceptive refers to the state of mind being deceived, and so you got a really weird word here. You got, false reality, false truth, or something like that. Okay. We can say that we can use the same reasoning behind the phrase ultimate reality. Okay? Ultimate here means what? The ultimate state of mind. The ultimate state of mind is what? The direct perception of emptiness. Okay? And if some object appears to be reality or truth to that state of mind, then we can refer to the object as ultimate reality. But the ultimate in ultimate reality actually refers to the state of mind perceiving it. And the reality or truth, ultimate reality or ultimate truth, the word reality only means real to that state of mind, or truth to that state of mind. Okay? And so the two applications of the phrases, ultimate reality and deceptive reality, are very similar. The applications are very similar.
다 군님들 돈이 용도 비키요는 그거 담바인다. 담 그거 담바인다. 또 그러나 민고를 된다. 다 투들로 출시 되지요. 그렇죠. 뭐샤 그거 담바 담이 미션 걸었더니 군도 그거 담바 군도 담바스 민이 내가 뭐 관인이라 삼로 땅 되니 관인이 뭐를 가도 담바인다. 담바 찔러 그거 대 찍어 된다면 뭐 대 치마. 오 그 빼콜라스다 다 대송 들어가잖아 다 빼콜라 샴비안 뒤로래
맞아
빼나 다도 시야다 내가 빼자고 나라랑 만지 가면 다 등산선은 다 했다 한에서 용도다 릴리스 용 내가 그때는 지스고 오코 용 밑에 코드시 코드네 주파도 수밥 지시사요 릴리바 죽세요 모타지 파친 쿠친 되네 그랬던 돈에 미파 주수 밥 지사콜라니 리티싱이나 모시 모티밥 죽시고 남도 피니 온데다 그 간제마 파파 주사이 사자콜라 남도 리티싱이 지사 용이 코지 민고 사자콜라
So you can posit two states of mind, okay? Over here is the deceived state of mind. Over here is the ultimate state of mind, meaning the direct perception of emptiness, right? So, visualize it this way. Over here you got deceived state of mind, which is actually a tendency to hold things as truly existing, right? And over here you have a ultimate state of mind, which is the direct perception of emptiness, and each one has its own object. This object applies to this state of mind, this object applies to this state of mind. What is it that is believed to be true by the deceased state of mind? It is what we call deceptive reality. Those objects which together constitute deceptive reality are what this believes to be true, or this believes to be reality, and that's why it's called deceptive reality, because this state of mind is called deceived. What it believes to be true is its object. So therefore, or real, what it believes to be real is its object. So we'll give its object the name deceptive reality. Over here you have the ultimate state of mind, and it's believing this object to be real. What is this object over here? Emptiness itself. Yeah, ultimate reality. And it's believing, this ultimate state of mind is believing this to be real, or this to be true. So we can give a name to this emptiness over here. We can give it the additional name, ultimate reality, ultimate truth, okay? And then Geshe-la says, we're about to embark on a certain illustration, okay? There's a certain illustration to illustrate what we just said. Even in modern day terms, we can phrase this illustration in modern day terms. You got a place where trains go out of, there's a certain building where trains start out, everybody gets on the train goes out to its destination. Then the train comes back, ends up here, everybody gets out. Okay, certain people get out, certain people get on, and it goes out again. Or you could say there's a place where a bus does the same thing. Or you could say there's a place where airplanes do the same thing, right? And how is that building named? It is named from the things which go out and come back to it, right? This is called a train station. Okay, why? Because trains go out and trains come back to it. This is called a bus station. Why? Because buses go out and buses come back to it. This is called an airport. Why? Because airplanes go out and come back to it. Okay, so that's going to be an illustration here.
English batela dua pena kambani ji galwe sei batik la kambi batik shi sawa da kutu gawe sei batik la kutu batik shi sawa da ngama ta tindi religion meta beli
Now in the days when this book was written, there weren't any trains or buses or airplanes. So what were there? Well, people went on foot, especially in Tibet, right? So people were walking around Tibet, and in Tibet it was often necessary. This is very common for travelers in the old days in Tibet. They often had to get over rivers. Okay, they bump into rivers. There are all these rivers that if you go east to west or west to east in Tibet, you run into all these rivers. So you get good at crossing a river. Two ways to cross a river. You either jump in and walk across. Okay, or you can get into a coracle, which is a leather, a round leather boat, or you can get into a small rowboat and ferry across to the other side, okay? So those places where, those platforms, okay, they're called baptek, means those platforms from which you take off. You could call it a dock, or you can call it like the last landing on the river before you have to jump off and walk across, okay? Those places where you jump off, walk across, and eventually come back to, or those places where you get into your little ferry boat, whether it's leather or wood, you know, and you cross and then you come back, okay? Skin, like yak skin coracles they're called, or come back. That platform, you have to think in terms of their platform, okay? So think of that platform as a place where things go out and things come back, whether it's talking by foot or by boat, okay? That's all. That's all. And here we have exactly the same thing. These two examples are supposed to relate why it is that ultimate reality is called ultimate reality and deceptive reality is called deceptive reality. I'm not translating anything else because he hasn't said anything else about why. Kandiyan again. Kandis. Pe kandis jagre. Pe dini kandis jagre. Demanila kandis jagre.
Nangani de demanila jayenda loji sha phana de la loji sha sunang de la loji sha. Lo kui lega chitange ani kuyu kola ani disting soro. Lo ni de bani zo yo mota da ri soro cha. Ta kuini yu ko ko papsi papti ko ta.
Lale.
Kui ta.
Nasa.
Kunzop kuyu ko yinza, kunzop ku zinza.
Nasa.
Kunzop dambasa tandam ku zinza wo.
Nasa.
Zinza ni tandam dambasa.
Okay. I asked him to explain the illustration because I didn't get it. I don't know about you guys. He says, look, don't you remember those two things we did over here, you know? This is called ultimate reality because it's the object of the ultimate state of mind. This is called deceptive reality because it's the object of the deceived state of mind. These two objects are given their names from the two things that are doing their thing with relation to them. They are like the basis or the object with which, upon which these two things are doing their thing. Okay, so these are like the platforms that are given their name by what's going on by people coming and going from them. You see, this is called a boat platform or a dock. It's given its name from the thing that goes out and comes back from it. And this is called like a place to jump off, a jumping off point physically. Due to the fact that a person jumping off point, because due to the fact that people jump off on and on and come to get over the river. Okay, so it's like two docking stations given their name from the things that go out and come back from them, meaning the two objects, ultimate reality and deceptive reality, are named from the states of mind which perceive them. Nothing else.
Yeah, oh, those page are yeah. Kunzop dambasa tandam dambani with the teasing racing.
We better explain the illustration, otherwise people will come out of Geshe Tutu Rinpoche's class saying that Geshe Tutu Rinpoche said that the two truths or the two realities relate to train stations. It's happened, okay? People will go back to America and say, you know, Geshe Tutu Rinpoche said that the two realities were train station and bus station. Just kidding.
What? That didn't it? You might have duales. Sini to when you say Pari Sini turned up. That didn't matter much young. That's what the young go and Tini got used to turn them, but you turn. Council made the talks my study, but the young go out. Turn them the year, but they turn the and touching me to do so. She thought, I don't get on number in the 2 yards. She Kundo can you meanings for she that you see when you can you to yard to Kundo be a chip of maybe they were Tomani the island there to each and Yanama sing duales, Yanni in the Carreta. Some took Dumatella, duales is Dua,
Dumatella,
what you not teach.
Do it like city.
Any marching, changing Tamati and the Namshe Ribales, or Tini Pasacalade, Tini Pasacala, like that, in Kashistua, Shajung, Santa Sure. Nobadella do a queen now, Lata, Nanga Tiko Tanga, Jokuniva down, Tangi, and Dam the Water, Kushor Latini, Duen Nangani, Chiksumi, but take what you all about to 2 tension, the Latin Sunja, Tangi. Jidan condition, 내가 대연이다 말이네. 걔네 다 하고 보주나. 이제 시에 들으시게. 다 그 가르쳐 버서는 여기 시야를 하나 닉틱틱도 군속다 전담 있게 해서 틀립 살아.
나네.
이제 다 나봤잖아. 그도에 나라. 돈이 무슨 또 냠샤 이시시 와라. 돈이 무슨 게 돈이 파파치가 남지 와라. 코당 야 냠샤한테 야 라는 제도 기람지 와라. 혼인이 라 군속 때마다 전담 때문에 깨져 시행이 와네.
나서
네 코스하고 딘데 고거래 제리더니 정말로 동업 실파 알아도 지 샤중도 쇼르라 중개지 시야.
나서
시야를 치면 숨어라.
나서 the quotation begins from the abbreviation of Arya Sangha 7 lines down on page 58. That quotation continues up to the next to the last line on page 58. And this is called Sharchung. Sharchung means incidental explanation, okay? It's not pertinent immediately to the main points being discussed here. But Jetsokapa says, hey, you know, while we're on the subject and while we're in the abbreviation of Arya Sangha, hey, why don't we talk about this extra point? Okay, this is like a sideline or something like a tangent, okay? And Jetsokapa says, you know, while we're on the subject of the two truths, since we've gone into such detail on the two realities, why don't we stop and talk about a certain issue that relates to that? Okay, I'll go ahead, okay? It'll be on the sellotape. Why don't we talk about another issue that relates to that? Those of you who know about the direct perception of emptiness, there are actually two stages to the direct perception of emptiness. One is the direct perception of emptiness itself while in deep meditation, which is called Nyamsha Yeshi, the wisdom of deep meditation. And then there's what's called subsequent wisdom, which means after you've come out of deep meditation, all of these other experiences that you have are called subsequent wisdom. They're still sort of counted as part of the experience of the direct experience of emptiness, but the first is actually in deep meditation, the direct experience of direct perception of emptiness, and then the second, subsequent wisdom or something like that, is other related realizations that you have which are not the direct perception of emptiness but happen during the same day shortly afterwards. Okay, so then an issue arises or a discussion arises. The first one is sometimes called ultimate. The second one is sometimes called deceptive. Now, what does ultimate and deceptive mean in that scenario? Okay, nothing.
전담도 여송하다. 다 전담도 여시에 깨지죠. 전담도 여시에 과 가상 띵이나 가르잖아. 조수 당도 전담도 상모다는 조사 직당 조분이 전담도 당. 니 참. 니 강화야 맞지. 니 강화야 맞니. 지강 전담. 전담도 숨. 조비 이니 주전도 전담도 여바 숨데스. 그리고 냄새 바비신 전담도 여바 숨데스. 다 군속도 여바 마송아 가르랬잖아. 근데 냠샤 이시도 군속도 여바 마송아 가르서는 정말로 동화로 신도 제가 군속도 여바 규제가 막 규제니 상기 나서 근데 내가 도삼시에 군속도 여서 마송아 제 규제니 상기 매마 인자고 나서 군속도 여 마송아 제
나서 it appears that sometimes, it says from this quotation that it appears that sometimes that stage, which is the deep meditation, the direct perception of emptiness, is sometimes described as existing ultimately. Okay, it's a state of mind, and it's sometimes described as existing ultimately. Now, everybody knows it doesn't fit either of the descriptions of existing ultimately. Okay, it doesn't fit the first description, and it doesn't fit the second description of what it means to exist ultimately. So how can we call it existing ultimately? Why is it that anyone would come along and say, this direct perception of emptiness during deep meditation exists ultimately? And Jetsokapa says, you know why? Because it doesn't fit either of the reasons that we just listed for calling something deceptive reality. Neither of those two reasons, or those two justifications for calling something deceptive reality is fulfilled with that particular state of mind. Now we'll do more on that. nothing.
어, 다
주체님만 타와인데.
어디 주된 저는 계속 왔대. 군속도 여버 쪽이 다 인증 구바인.
나서.
그래서 군속도 유비 주den가만이 매발로 공소송가 비맞게 되나.
나서. It says here, neither of those previously mentioned requirements or prerequisites for something to be, or reasons why we call something deceptive reality, is fulfilled here. 나서. 나서. Page 58. It's about the gyusangamani kansiyo니.
주den가만이 누가 전에.
어디요니?
군속도 여버 쪽비.
It's
주den가만이 매발라.
8 lines from the bottom. It fulfills, this particular state of mind fulfills neither of the prerequisites or the reasons why we would call something deceptive reality. It fulfills neither of them. Neither one describes the state of the direct perception of emptiness. Listen.
다 주den가만이 있어 주den님하고 때가 야 로거와 가와도 때를 그거와 어때요? 여기를 찍을 여기 근데 뭐 당비 군속 그래. 저도 당비 군속로 또배 다바담 이미처럼. 코텔라 당기면 누시 차이지. 코 당기면 찍게.
Nasa. Remember that Jatagapa says we're not going to be able to call it, we have to call it ultimate reality, or existing ultimately, because we can't call it something that exists deceptively, because it doesn't fulfill either of the descriptions of what it is to exist deceptively. Now, which two are we talking about? What are those two that we're talking about that came before, he says? Geshe-la says, it's the two descriptions that came before, okay? It's the first description of what it is to exist deceptively, and the second description of what it is to exist deceptively. Why does it not fulfill the first description of what it is to exist deceptively? Because you can't say about it, it doesn't fulfill the first description of what it is to exist deceptively, because you cannot say about it that it is simply a production of the mind. You can't say that it is simply a construct of the mind, right? That's what the first version of what it was to exist deceptively was. And you can't say that about the direct perception of emptiness.
다 주den식들이 납중납중이잖아. 납중납중이면서 이제 좀 주바텔라. 주발레스 주den탕 남도 지금 군님 최전의 샤 군속도 유비 주den도 군속도 요아르 주den 거라 군에 요군에 놈에 지직체 아비시네 다 보도 숨이야는 뭐 군속도 유비 주den 숨만 키는 가서 주den 안되나 숨 차송아
라니
또배다 잠시야지 단단전에 인시야
라니
다 이런 거만 인시다 또배다 잠이인데 지금 직탕만 송아 군에 요모로 미과치배 포탕만 송아
라니
야 냠샤 이시더라 대마상아 인자 군속도 유비만 송 되게 결합도 함시네
Nasa. Page, now what is the second one? Okay, what is the second one? Okay, we got the first one. It cannot, the direct perception of emptiness during deep meditation cannot be called deceptive, something that exists deceptively, because it doesn't fit those two descriptions. The first one was existing as simply as a production of your mind or a projection of your mind. It doesn't fulfill that one. Now what's the second one? We have to go to page 57. We have to go to the 7th line down, where it says, you know what, gyuten meaning dependent things, and namdos, which means among dependent things, what do you call it, the constructing state of mind, okay? Among those two can be called deceptive reality. Why? Because two things can be said of them. What two things can be said of them? They trigger mentally afflicted stuff, and they serve as the basis for appellation or something like that, okay? And it's the first one of those two, right? We got three there, right? Now we got three. We got existing deceptively is described as that which is a construct of the mind. We got existing deceptively described as that which triggers afflicted thing, and that which acts as an object of appellation. Okay, it's these first two that we're talking about. Okay, it's those first two that we're talking about. So we're talking about because it exists as the direct perception of emptiness does not exist as a simple construct of the mind. A. B. It is not something which would trigger mental afflictions. So you couldn't use either one of those prior descriptions to characterize it as something which exists deceptively. Say, hey, let's say it exists ultimately, even though we don't mean existing ultimately in either of the former senses that we've been using it. Okay, that's all. That's all.
Ti 제도기 신이 군도당 전담니까 여바 송데 스타트 제도비 시세 기세 파냠샤 가서 파베 제도비 시 어 파베 제도비 시 있잖아 군도당 전담니까 여송아 도에 남아되나는 스타트 조선 시에는 가르쳐는 군도도 여송에 되게 생각하서 말은 그 요콜라 군 대만니까 연구할 대만이 연구할 제도비 시라 전담 대만 연구할 데이터 그 요콜라 군도 대만에 해서 군도 대만들 사모 단계 여다 근데 지금 수상시 지렌인데 담시기네 그래서 그 담담도 전담 대만라 사모스 단계 와인다 네 지금 사모단에 전담 비여서 말이지 그래서 여기 이 군도다 전담시 여기 군도다 전담 고 있잖아 그 요다 자 그래도 꼭
맞아. And why is it that the subsequent state of wisdom, right? The wisdom that you have after you come out of the direct perception of emptiness during the next few hours or something like that, why is it that's characterized actually in two different ways? It is said to exist both deceptively and exist ultimately. Okay, so the direct perception during meditation, deep meditation, is described as existing ultimately simply by default because it can't be described as existing deceptively in two of the meanings that we had before. But why is it that you can describe the subsequent period after you come out of the direct perception of emptiness and you're having other incredible spiritual realizations? Why can that be described as existing both ultimately and deceptively? Well, from the objects which it's dealing with, okay? It is mostly, at that point, perceiving again deceptive reality. It is mostly acting in the realm of deceptive reality. And then Geshe-la says, and I guess once in a while they say that you start thinking about emptiness again. Okay, you start thinking about emptiness again. And from that point of view, we can say it can be characterized as ultimate, existing ultimately. Okay, in these uses of the terms. Now Geshe-la makes a final point. If you take the phrase existing deceptively here, that one phrase, right? And if you take the two times we've mentioned directly here, existing ultimately, right? And if you try to mix it up with the last two descriptions of it, of what those two phrases mean, right? The first connotation and the second connotation, big trouble. Don't even try. Okay, separate this instance of the phrases existing ultimately and existing deceptively, and don't even try to mix it up with the other two that we already had, because they're no relation at all. Okay, now we have a whole new connotation of those two phrases.
신의 샘잠비 수 키시 코지 따사당이 깨져지와 코 샘잠비 코니 오 두지 계란 돌아 엄마가 계란 돌아 코지 따사디네 당기도 와
라레
따이다 땅한테 계란지 캔에 들어지는 코지 따사당한테 렌산에 cap사야 뭐 팁키 말해 나 샘잠바 이노 코지 따사당한테 렌 잡투 꾸리
Nasa. We got a whole new battle going to come up now. Okay, page 58. second line from the bottom says, don't forget that this is a reasoned exposition by whom? By Master Vasubandhu. And that little section is going to continue up to page 59, sixth line from the bottom where it says, Chepe Tenos, okay? And this refers to a special fight going on, okay? The lower two schools, which is the detailist and the sutra schools, okay? They are going to take some shots at the middle way school, which is the fourth school, right? And Krishna says, well, certain people in the middle way school, okay? And they make certain criticisms on the middle way school, okay? Then the MindOnly guys come along and say, and the MindOnly school is sitting on the sidelines and watching, and they say to the middle way school, you know what? You guys cannot defend yourselves from those two lower schools, given your stupid school system, okay? And if you were in the MindOnly school system like we are, you could have defended yourselves from those same accusations. So let's show you how to do it from our point of view. And we'll show you how we defend ourselves successfully from those accusations of the two lower schools. And don't you wish that you middle way schools were in our school, because you cannot defend yourself from those accusations. Now that's what this section is going to be all about. Okay?
홀로 발배 낭라 진짜게 저는 뭐 많이네 디나라 베자 디나라 가르송도 레다나미 예 제빠뽀고 메 송샤 다 도대외야 거니 지라마와 이기 우마바 저랑들다 지신도 캐니 베자 그 낭라 레다나미 예 제빠뽀지 메 딱 와서 딱 저도 가르치니까
맞아.
내가 볼때 딱 말도 내 세다 또어디 시키야 알아도 심중 셈바시죠. 어째? 내가 남이도 딱 말도 지다 남이잖아. 이거 말아도 누구한테 경험에 따라와 내 야치비 남이 대신 세워라 봐. 고도 샹. 내가 제법 보니 유송샤 받아. 내가 남이 유송샤. 이제 나. 제법 내 송샤 제법 쓰기다. 가도 그러시는 제법 쓰기 내한테 소파포 어떻게 되는지 고마.
맞아.
시에송바테 다 결혼 가와라 비면서. 전담도 쓰기 바 꾸수 쓰기.
맞아. 맞아.
다 여기 니 식 뭐라
니 여시.
제서 찍매. 한테 손에다가 전담도 세나를 숨자로 결혼도 전담도 매바 찍지 않아. 이와치. 결혼도 꾼속도 쓰기는 숨자로 꾼속도 이어서 결혼도 나와 결혼도 누가 고속도인데 전담도 매 받지 봐 꾼속도 찍봐 봐. 다 결혼도 빼자도 캐내 빌리면 니 찍면서 다 과기야. 이제 따서 땅을 해서.
Okay, here's what the lower two schools say when they take their shots at the middle way school. Okay, they say, you middle way school guys, now let's see, as I recall, you think that the second turning of the wheel is something that should have been taken literally, right? And here there's a code word, okay? Dundamba Tombani here, which literally only says the ultimate, the emptiness from. Geshe-la says that's a reference to the middle turning of the wheel, okay? That's a code word for the middle. So in the middle turning of the wheel, during the middle turning of the wheel, the Buddha made certain statements. And you guys say that we should take them literally. You middle way guys say that the second turning of the wheel is something that we should take literally. Which is to say, you middle way guys, that although you believe two things exist, you believe something else doesn't exist. What are the two things they say do exist? Karma and the maturations of karma, the ripening of karma, okay? So what's an example of karma in the middle way school? You could say the mental function called the movement of the mind. Okay, which is called Senjun Semba, okay? That mental function which consists of movement of the mind. When the mind moves, that mental function. You do say that that does exist. And then you go on to say that the ripening of karma does exist, okay? Over a period of years. So for example, our body would be an example of a ripening of karma. So you middle way guys, taking the second turning of the wheel to be literal, claim that karma and the ripening of karma do exist. And then after that you say that the person involved, okay, doesn't exist. The agent doesn't exist. And Geshe-la says, how do we gloss agent here? Meaning the person who commits the karma, the person who does the karma. You say they don't exist. Okay, so this is how the lower two schools are attacking the middle way school. You guys, taking the second turn of the wheel literally, say that although karma and its ripening does exist, you say that the agent here doesn't exist. Now they have a further question to ask the middle way people, okay? When you say the first two things do exist, and the third thing doesn't exist, are you saying deceptively or ultimately? Okay? Are you saying deceptively or ultimately? Okay? If you say deceptively, they don't exist deceptively. I'm sorry, they don't exist ultimately. Let's take that one first, okay? When you middle way guys, if you're going to answer me that we're talking about this ultimately here, which would be to say that the first two exist ultimately and the third one doesn't exist ultimately, you can't say that. Because you're the guys, aren't you the school system that runs around saying that nothing exists ultimately? So how can you make a division here and say, oh, these things do exist, comma, ultimately, and this one thing doesn't exist, comma, ultimately. You can't do that. You have to make a blanket statement. If you're going to say anything, you got to say none of them exist ultimately, because that's your school system. And suppose you answer me, no, we were talking about deceptively. Okay, but wouldn't you say in your school system that all three of these things exist? These are all deceptive reality. Karma, the ripening of karma, and the agent who commits the karma. According to your school system, middle way guys, they all exist deceptively. They're all deceptive reality. So you can't give me either answer, can you? Okay, you can't answer me at all, you middle way guys. You're stuck. Okay, that's their accusation. No, so again.
내가 남이 유시에 처럼 전담라 유시기 나셔 다시 가지고
나네
제가 뭐도 되어요 내가 님도 유시 처럼 비즈나라 유시에 전담라 예봤잖아 최탐지 전담도 최탐지 전담으로 몇 가지 중에 돈이 이렇게 저 쇼카네 제대로 내가 남이 제법은 님에서 시에송바디 전담으로 이나서 인생이 받더라
나선
전담만 이나 지다나 최담 정원님이 전담으로 메시다 같이 이렇게 하시는 군속도 인생에 내가 남이 님도 메시에티 가서 유시에티 군속도 유시야 하잖아 아니 제법 보여 군속도 유
나선
아니 제법 메시에도 과하지야
Nothing. And their last part of their argument is repeated on the second line of page 59, meaning, okay, you said two of those things did exist. What was that? The karma and the ripening of the karma. Do you middle way guys, are you talking ultimately? Okay, because if you're saying ultimately, your whole system is blown up because you just said no object in the world has any nature of its own. So how can you go around saying that karma and the ripening of karma are things that exist ultimately? You can't.
군속세에 가능해서 쓰기 군속세에 다 되네. 인증하고 주거되라. 민당 주바당 다바당 탄인이 군속이라. 다 됐을 가르쳐나 민당 주바당 다바당 탄인이 군속이잖아. 딱 군속되면 가서 군다길이 강이면 좋아라. 어때 군속이니까. 탐지 랑기 텐이니 전담바이노잖아. 랑기 텐이 주바고는 전담바세요 그래. 지라마도 도대와 니라 셈다바 끼히는 뒤. 저는 갈라쓰기만.
나나나나.
고지네. 아, 네. 저다 근데 이나다 나다 랭자.
나서.
군도 뒤에서는 전담 뒤에서는 나 가르쳐야지.
So here these two guys having a punch out, right? One side you got the middle way guy. You know, the representatives of the middle way school. And then the other side you have who? The two lower schools. Okay, the detailists and the sutras, right? And the detailists and the sutras were posing this, conundrum to the middle way school. So there's a punch out between these two guys. And now comes this nosy guy called MindOnly, and he's going to try to get between them, He's going to try, hey, I can do that, let me in there, I'll do my thing, So he butts in, okay? He butts into the middle and he says, and he turns around to the two lower school and he says, hey you guys, when you say that the middle way school thinks that this thing exists deceptively or this thing exists ultimately, what do you mean when you say ultimate, and what do you mean when you say deceptively? And here's the answer of the lower two schools to the MindOnly school guy who butted in. Okay, so what is it? What do we mean when we say deceptive? And it's on beginning on line 5 at the very end, page 59. What we mean is those things which are names, those things which are expressions, those things which are labels, those things which are terms. What are they talking about? Kuntangs. They're talking about constructs. Okay, basically, if you convert it to MindOnly school terminology, right, they are talking about constructs. Okay, and what do they mean when they say ultimate? When they talk about ultimate, line 6, page 59. Oh, they're talking about any existing object which could exist by definition. Okay, the objects which exist by definition. Okay, that's what we mean when we say ultimate. Okay, and then the MindOnly school says, oh, that's what you mean by deceptive. That's what you mean by ultimate. Hey, come and ask me that question. I can give you a good answer. Okay, you should have asked me. I could have given you a decent answer. Not those middle way guys. Okay, that's okay.
제가 저 단샘 담배 가르친 거였어요. 내가 남이님이 여sel라비에 전담도 여세나 되기도 없다. 전담도 여세나 되기도 가르레서나 말아 전담세라 사모니 봐.
네.
전담도 여세다 내가 남이님한테 똑배야 따바 참마인 거 유라 이모마 임비도 누르면 주바이. 아 전담도 여세나 되기도 없다. 양 군속도 여세나 되기도 내가 남이님한테 군속도 여세나 되기도 가르에서는 족수님이 군속발라 삼로 땅네 타니에 주비 시에바 그 유레도가
나네
군속도 여세나 삼문이 동사야 다 독수 어디다
Oh, you should ask me because either way you go is fine with me. Okay, what do you mean? Oh, us MindOnly guys, how do we interpret the ideas ultimate and deceptive? Well, if you go along and say that karma and its consequences are ultimate, or something that exists ultimately, that's fine with me. I can buy that. Why? Because in my first interpretation of what it means to exist ultimately, I say anything that's anything which is not simply a projection or a construct of the mind exists ultimately. So in my school, hey, you guys can say those first two exist ultimately. Fine with me. Why? Because they are not simply constructions of the mind. Okay? Oh, and you want to call them deceptive? Fine with me too. Okay? Why? Because in my second interpretation of what it means to exist deceptively, that's fine with me too. Why? Because it's something that what was that? Joktu nipe kunzo la sena digres kayen sena ngen dile. I don't mind if you called them the deceptive, because in my second version of what it means to exist deceptively, I said anything that is the object of that state of mind which is examining nominal things, right? Remember we said that? Anything which is the object of that state of mind which is examining nominal things can be described as deceptive. So hey, should have asked me, because either one you want me to say, I can say, okay? If you say those first two, karma and its consequences exist ultimately, fine with me. You could have said karma and its ripening exist deceptively, fine with me too. You should ask me. Okay, nothing. Yeah. So you lower two school guys, you could ask me, because in my system, right? You can say that karma and its ripening, right? They exist ultimately because they fit the meaning of existing ultimately that I gave in the first version. Okay? And you can also come up and say that those same two things exist deceptively, because that fits quite nicely with my second version of what it means to exist deceptively. So, you know, either way it would have been fine with me. Okay, that's okay. Listen.
Kini chidar depa yu tu tokla rawa sa kari lamna digende yu tu tokla rawa sa tokla rako na kari chana digende
Nasa, nasa.
yu labshana sawa ni to kari lamna digende
Nasa.
yu tu tokla rako
So here's the actual wording of the exchange between the lower two schools and the mind-only guys, okay? It starts on page 59, line 5, at the very end, and it says, you want to say that deceptive refers to names, expressions, labels, and terms, okay? Meaning that object which is located, or that object which is the arena for the state of mind which is examining nominal things. These are all nominal words that suggest nominalness, right? So if you want to call it that way, if you want to say that deceptive refers to nominal stuff, okay, or to the state of mind which is exploring nominal things, okay, and la, if you want to describe it as if you want to describe ultimate as referring to those objects which exist by definition, right? Shena means, is that the way you lower schools want to take the meaning of ultimate and deceptive? Hey, wona means hey then. Detana, if that's the way it is, then let's talk about those two things, meaning karma and their ripenings. Those two things, mingduyangya, they exist normally, and right? They exist normally, and and they also exist according to us by definition, meaning ultimately. So, whichever one you want to say it is, Tolarako means, this is a very weird expression in Tibetan which comes out something like, hey, you can have it any way you want. Okay, any way you want to dream it up is fine with me, okay? It just depends. You can have it any way. It depends on whatever you want to say. Or any way you want to think of it, that's fine with us. Okay? That's the actual wording that backs up what Geshe-la just described. That's okay. Nasa.
군도도 요새는 되기도 세. 적도 니비 군도 걸어 두삼 시에는 숭아래.
나서.
걔니까 더 떠올라라고 해서 걔니까 요새 람나 되기도 세. 걔니까 요집이
나서. Page 59, 7th line from the bottom, we come out of the quotation from the reasoned exposition of Master Vasubandhu, right? With the words She Sung Te, 7th line from the bottom, page 59, we are leaving the quotation. And now what's going to happen? Jetsun Kama is going to gloss it for you, okay? So he says, okay, Dendaba Yuzuni, the way in which they are describing existing ultimately is, Ngama is the first one of the two, the former way the former connotation of the phrase. And Kunzop the Yuzuni, the way in which they're describing things existing deceptively, Chimata, of course, there's a second explanation, okay? And then you got Yuchebiduno, meaning Jetsun Kama says, and what the point is, you can have it both ways. Okay, fine with us. Us mind-only guys, we don't mind if you lower two schools have it both ways. You can have your cake and eat it too. Okay.
What?
Nothing. That's it. That's it. And now the Simsambas nail it down. Okay, they say the mind-only school nails it down. They say, if you take existing ultimately in the way we describe it, okay, and if you take existing deceptively in the way that we describe it, then you don't have these problems that you guys have when you hit the second turn of the wheel. Okay, you middle way guys have problems. You hit problems when you hit the second turn of the wheel. How? When you're in the second turn of the wheel, you can no longer describe any object as being simultaneously something that exists ultimately and something that exists deceptively, right? If you're going to take the second turn of the wheel literally, in the second turn of the wheel, Lord Buddha said, nothing exists ultimately. Hey, but we don't take the second turn of the wheel literally, so no problem, you know? When he said nothing exists ultimately, what he meant was they exist ultimately and they exist deceptively at the same time. Okay, so we don't have that problem that you have. You have your problem, middle way people, because you want to take the second turn of the wheel to be ultimate. In which case, existing the phrases existing ultimately and existing deceptively would have to be contradictory. But if you take it our way and you don't take the second turn of the wheel as being literal, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have it both ways. Why did the mind-only school bring up this whole section? Okay? Why did they even present this argument, which is actually an argument by the lower two schools directed to the middle way school? Okay? They're actually directing the same complaints to the middle way school, right? By implication, right? The guys who butted in between these two boxers, you know, and said, what do you mean when you're accusing them of that? You know, I can answer that, you know, I can take the hit, you know. They can't, but I can, you know. What are they saying by implication? The middle way schools can't take the hit. And in a sense, they're saying, they're actually, if you think about it, they're not fighting with the lower two schools. They're helping the lower two schools complain and beat up the middle way guys. They're saying, oh, don't worry, I know you can't take this hit. I know you can't explain it in your school. I can explain it for you, you know. In essence, when you say that, you're saying, you're helping these guys beat up these guys, okay? So actually what's going on is, why did this whole argument get introduced here at this point by the mind-only school? Because by implication, they are helping the lower two schools take a shot at the higher school, okay, at the middle way school. Now that presentation by the mind-only school of two different interpretations of what it is to exist ultimately and two different interpretations of what it is to exist deceptively becomes some kind of justification for them. You see what I mean? They said, now they can use that as a justification. Having presented that whole nice little system with two versions of this and two versions of that, they can carry that into this argument as some kind of authority. You know, now they're going to use their own little presentation as authority. They can back themselves up. They say, hey, remember back when we said there was two ways to interpret these two things? Well, that's exactly why we can handle this case, you know, because we do have those two interpretations. So they're going to use this as an excuse to almost refer back to their original argument, their original presentation, as some kind of now authority or some kind of precedent. Okay.
what how did it in machine that what to go come here in the summer
Listen.
kansa kunsu to ye chang jesu le da na mi kunsu to ye chi jesu ye la da tem da lo se kansa kunsu to ye se di jo tu ni be kunsu para sam lo ta jesu me se di je yu da kansa rang to boko ta yi ne yen sin je yu da ta yi ji na ne ta yu kan de
Listen.
ya da kansa kunsu to ye se di jo tu ni be kunsu para sa kunsu ne ba yi mi sin da
Lani.
je yu ye Yes, me see the kind of cancer around for a tie in
Listen. Now the mind-only school can make a further statement. They can say, let's take people, person, the person. Okay. First of all, we can say about a person that it is something which exists deceptively. In which interpretation of existing deceptively? Second. Okay, because it's an example of deceptive reality. Okay, so a person, they can say of a person that a person exists deceptively. Okay, and then they can go on and say, by the way, neither does a person exist substantially. Meaning, people exist only through labels. What are they saying?
You have to see all the parts.
Yeah, in and of itself, that thing called a person is something that exists through labels, does not exist deceptively. Okay, so at one moment they can say two different things about the person. They can say this is something that exists deceptively, and on the other hand, this is something that does not exist substantially, but rather exists through labels alone. Meaning, you remember what Dagyo means. Okay, listen. We already, we went through that so many times, right? Difference between existing substantially and existing through labels. We don't have a problem with that, right? Okay, that's okay. Kodisa.
What is it? Not the nation. Not to know good deep and the baby. Somebody could be led. I mean, you could do your chin tears. I led and I mean, with Lea Contanas to do some charo. I mean, so what else to do with the charo. 자기 깨져 용하고 내다 남이다 강사 쌤다 받아 지라마니 깨져 중다 어디 그래서 내다 남이 군숙도야 여진 대소야 여라 어디 내다 남이니 뭐지 군숙도 요새 조선입이 안 지금 군숙도 여래 내 인생의 대에 다다이기나 대요
맞아. Third line from the bottom, page 59. But karma and its ripenings. Okay, remember now we had three things that they were having to fight over? It was the person, the agent, right? And then it was the karma, and then it was the ripening. So the mind-only school can come along and say, what do we think about the agent or person? Well, it exists deceptively, and it is not something that exists substantially. But what can we say about karma and its ripening? We can say about that it's also something that exists deceptively. In which interpretation of the word? Second. Okay? Why? Because it is an example of deceptive reality. They are both examples of deceptive reality. But about them, we have to say they do exist substantially. They do exist substantially. Okay? And don't exist merely as something labeled. All right? That's again.
내가 남이 뭐냐 군주비에 소화에 생각. 다대가 손이 돈이 왕지 군주비에 손으로 아 이제 저 뒤에서 손 좋아 손들이 돈이 왕지 전담도 매세요. 다 매표 콩으로 깨나 지대비 시 바다 되는 거. 뭐 그거 이나 통하잖아. 지대비 시비 유 인배. 적돈이배 전담도 매 받아. 지대비 시비 유세다 지대만 세요 꼭겠자 벌잖아. 타니 저기 테마콜라샤 아두 돈이 도겐이 테마라 마샤가 타니지 남샤데 하데가데도 고쳐 겐지 12유고 지데미 시바 되게 라네 투비 시바 라네 오그 요인데 안도 세네
근담도 매
조분이 안도 전담도 매 다고 조분이 군소 위에서 조분이 안도 군소가 사무 땅아래 조분이 안도 시비 전담도 미고 군고라 12유 아 세네 조분이 안도 전담도 와
we can give you, us mind-only people, can give you further support for our saying that all three exist deceptively, right? All three what? Karma, its ripenings, and the agent who commits the karma, right? We can say in our school, furthermore, that they exist deceptively. In which interpretation of deceptively? In the second. because they don't exist ultimately as it's described in the second interpretation. Prove it. And they do prove it, okay? Page 59, next to last line, it says, due to the fact that it is the object of the worldly state of mind. And what did worldly state of mind? That was a code word for the state of mind that lives in nominal stuff. Okay, the state of mind that or works in nominal stuff, or analyzes or examines things according to nominal stuff. That state of mind, anything which is its object, right, can no longer be something which exists ultimately, as existing ultimately is described in the second interpretation. Okay, anything which is the object of a deceptive state of mind, basically, or anything which is the object of a deceived state of mind, basically, can no longer exist ultimately as that is described in the second version, right? Therefore, it must be something that exists deceptively as described in the second version. They say, okay. Listen. Listen.
디니 지델레 데비 시비 유 마이바 가르사 멘테스 마인데 기 유니 지델레 데비 시비 유스나 돈이 무슨 돈인지 로크 유고세 이 유니 주토미 비치 생이 이 비치로 수수지원 남기 지다와신 주미도 지데다 돈이 콜라시아 나서 지델레 데비 시비 유 혼인이 뭐지 쳐제 지델레 데비 시비 유 마인데 지델레 데비 시비 유스나 주토미 비치 생이 주토미 비치 생이잖아 말아도 돈이 라마삼 주미야 돈이
now let's flip over to page 60, first line. The first line says, those two, right? Meaning what? Karma and its ripenings, okay? Those two, meaning karma and its ripenings, could never serve as the object of that knowledge which is beyond the world, which transcends the world, right? Now that's a code word for the direct perception of emptiness, okay? They could never be the object of the direct perception of emptiness. Why? Because its object, meaning the object of the direct perception of emptiness, is judamepa. It is beyond all description, okay? And this is very famous. Sometimes they say emptiness, which is beyond all speaking, beyond all thinking, beyond all description, okay? Sometimes they say it that way. Beyond all verbal description, beyond all mental thinking. For whom? For people who haven't seen it directly yet, okay? For non-Aryas, okay? Yeah, so for them, it is totally beyond description. They can't give you an accurate description of it. Normal people who haven't seen it directly cannot give you an accurate description of what emptiness really is. And it is also chi-tseni-yin. Chi-tseni here means the characteristic which is the overall characteristic, okay? What does that mean? Emptiness, okay? It is an overall characteristic that covers all things. It is a characteristic of all things. So here, overall characteristic means emptiness itself. It is a characteristic which exists over all things, okay? So why can't those two, karma and its ripenings, be described as the object of the direct perception of emptiness? Well, for two reasons. It's not that thing which is indescribable, okay? They are not that thing which is indescribable, meaning emptiness, and they are not that one characteristic which covers all things, meaning emptiness itself, okay? And for those two reasons, it cannot be described as existing ultimately, in the latter sense of the term, okay?
This lapkentela ngati lenga ti chupar ngati lenga sana chirama wa to de wan ta sa tanga ti ta sa prepyon tanga ta ta chukre se na she ri pe na se bu shi bu sung na sa ta de jang go la song mo chi
then it says end of quotation. Now what has it been quoting? Okay, that's the reasoned exposition of Master Vasubandhu who was speaking. Okay, that last piece there. Now we go on to the next piece. Tekchen Bakaji means some people of the Mahayana, right? Some people of the higher way, right? Meaning who? Talking about the Madhyamikas, complaining about the middle way people. They say nothing exists by definition. They say everything exists deceptively. Okay, some people say that. Okay, some people claim that. And who is it that this previous debate is aimed at? This whole hassle. Lenga means like this whole dispute or this whole hassle. Who has that been directed at? By whom to whom? By the lower two schools, to the middle way people, right? This whole thing has been directed to that, and it is stated clearly that that's to whom this hassle is being presented, and that they can't answer. Okay, that they, because they say, nothing exists by definition, everything exists by deceptively. That's why it's clearly stated in Master Vasubandhu's text, these are the people to whom the hassle is being presented, and the implication is, these are the people who supposedly can't answer those objections. Okay? Nothing.
Oma tanju ta jirama do do ni ta ta simdan bedo kongi len ja tu mar suma
lane
ina ta oma tanju wa do kongi len jana ta ja tu di
lane
kar se na le ta na mi ni ye cheba bu me suma wa ko ba be ka to de le ta na mi ni ye se de ton nam ye be ka cha mar ta oma be ne je oma
lane
le ta na mi ni ye se ton nam ye be ka cha mar ani tu ye chi 제밥은 매스에디 오 전담도 매지.
나네.
전담 마베테 마탄주에 대신.
So is it actually, in actuality, is it the case that the middle way guys can't respond to this? Of course not, okay? The consequence group, right, the Prasangikas, the consequence group of the middle way school can explain it quite easily. Did Lord Buddha say in the second turn of the wheel that karma and its ripenings do exist, and yet the person, the agent who commits the karma doesn't exist? Yeah, he did say that. He did say that in the middle turn of the wheel. Well, what did he mean? He meant simply that karma and its ripenings do exist nominally, or deceptively, in a deceptive way, in a nominal way. And he meant that the person committing the karma doesn't exist in an ultimate way. That's all he meant. We can explain that easy enough. Okay, no big deal. Okay, and that's how the middle way prasangika or consequence group would answer that. Nothing else.
이나야 상황 거라도 딱 봐 있으라 비와서 어때 지금 이 전부린 소녀 간거 크스요 말에 딱 오타 굉장히 제법고 굉장히 매지 되래 항상 지담 마셔게 뭐라 안 집어는지 손주의 체력이 제법 딱 봐인게 제법고 전부린 간가 소녀 오 그지 오타 대요 말에 지금 뭐라 안 집어는 지
now, how would the independent group in the middle way school answer this accusation, right? Hey, the Buddha during the middle turn of the wheel said that karma and its ripenings do exist, and the agent doesn't exist, right? I think one of them might have... No? Okay, sorry. This is how they would answer it. The first half, they would answer exactly the same as the Prasangika. Meaning what? They would say, yeah. What the Buddha meant was that karma and its ripenings do exist in a nominal way, do exist in a deceptive way, okay? But when they get to the second one, they would answer differently than the consequence group. They would say, what the Buddha meant when he said that the agent doesn't exist, right, is he was talking about that creator God of the non-Buddhists, okay? He was talking about that guy that supposedly made the world, right? What are the qualities of this guy that supposedly made the world, right? Well, first of all, he's this big guy that made everything in the universe, okay? Secondly, he has the quality of being Takpa. He is unchanging, eternal and unchanging, okay? This guy is eternal and unchanging, okay? So some eternal, unchanging guy, God, right, that created the world, creator God, an agent in that sense, see? That doesn't exist, okay? That kind of agent doesn't exist. Karma and its ripenings do exist in a nominal sense. But some guy who made the world, who's permanent, unchanging, and eternal, doesn't exist. That's what it means. That's what the Buddha meant. That's how the independent group of the mind-only school would respond.
Je passe, je peux consoler. What is in consoles mean Tava some child? Somebody somebody Carla ones in Checorsen, she Gundala, Tabi consoles, Gundala, she because of Shawan or Tashawan, she's about the Shawan, Shawan. Je peux consoler, you want to call a shower, but same that be shungi Nala young, Yakuto to Lava Mango, you are. 先往滚大，先往用都送不过来，大的工作、小的工作、绝的工作，送过来是，他这送用就是他提讲我老公，基本天下还是个个都送。
Now we're on page 60, line 5 at the end. Again, we're getting a quotation from distinguishing between the middle and the extremes, dividing the middle from the extremes, right? And this says there are three kinds of deceptive. When you say deceptive in the mind-only school, even within the mind-only school, it has three different connotations, okay? The word deceptive can have three different connotations. What are they? The first one is called labeled stuff, labels, okay? The second one is called mental stuff. The third one is called expression, okay? So you got labels, you've got mental things, and then you've got expression. What do these refer to? These are three different ways in which deceptive is described by the mind-only school, and they correspond to the three attributes or the three groups of the mind-only school. The first one, labels, corresponds to the group of constructs. The second one, mind, corresponds to dependent things. Okay, and the third one, expressions, corresponds to totality or emptiness in the mind-only school. Now, how that's true, we're going to get to. Okay. In what sense can the first attribute or the first group be characterized as, labeled deceptive? Okay, labeled deceptive, right? In what sense can they? Because what does construct mean in the mind-only school? Something which is merely made up by the mind. Something which is merely constructed by the mind. In that sense, it's a falsity. It's a deceptive thing. Okay, so we can talk about the deception of labels or something like that. Okay, the deception of labels means that category called constructs is deceptive in the sense that it is merely a construct of the mind. They are merely constructs of the mind. So that's the way in which the first group can be called deceptive.
가래 군속도 유스서 여사의 군속도 그런데 전담도 메시 전담 댐보 가르샤그래 시도라 티는 군속도 유스 군속 발라 딘징고 샤하 말에 걔도 신의 셈다 다 티리 딘징도 요 랑신 두비야 말이지 저 빠져네 다 타마콜라 때때 집이 타마콜라 고라니 저 빠져지 뜻이콜라 타마콜라 가르 무슨 딘징고 내송아 가상이야 원래 봐 인자다 딘징콜라 Titanda di Shibi Kun, Dinzingu, Dinzingu Shana, again. You know, go Shibi Kun to see the Shiba in Bichane, and the Kunzo of the Shawan Chitamala, Tina Marab Chitan Chi on the Zanako, Shawan the Tos, Shawan the Tos, and Semdamata Omani Matiage. But she Amas. She said, Oma is a quite certain right to us, your Marie, who didn't go to Lugava, Yoma. How she knows them that he did Ali Hare Yoma. Simply, much as she Amainda, Shang, Tor, Sheva, oh, she was a did. She had a course Sheva in between, Sheva in Basamotane, she could go, that
secondly, is what's called here literally the deception of mind, right? The deception of something mental. And that's supposed to be referring to Shenwangs, dependent things. Now how is that? Okay, do you remember way back when we started having fights between the MindOnly school and the middle way school? They started to punch it out, they started to argue. What were they arguing about? They were arguing about things that existed ultimately or didn't exist ultimately, things that did exist by definition or didn't exist by definition, and the whole fight started out like that. They were arguing about that whole thing, and then they start getting into, what do you mean by ultimate reality, what do you mean by deceptive reality, and they got into deceptive reality, and they were trying to describe, well, what does the deceptive mean in deceptive reality, and they were getting off into, deceptive to the state of mind that holds things to be true, right, to ignorance itself, the tendency to hold things as self-existent. It boiled down to that. That state of mind was deceived, and that's why we talk about deceptive reality, and this is the difference between deceptive reality and ultimate reality. So all of that argument boiled down to that deceived state of mind, right? I mean, basically, it all came down to deceived state of mind. So the deceived state of mind is going to act as the representative of all Shenwangs, of all dependent things. And Geshe-la says they often talk about what is the best and biggest dependent thing. You know, what is number one dependent thing? What is the most important dependent thing to be talking about? It is the state of mind which is mistaken. It is the tendency to hold things as self-existent that is the main one that we have to worry about. That is the crux or the linchpin of all dependent things. So it's not strange that in identifying the second kind of deceptive, they're talking about the deception of the state of mind. What state of mind are they referring to? The deceived state of mind, the tendency to grasp things as self-existent. So here again we have a deception, right? So far we've had a deception in the form of constructs, which are deceptive in the sense that they are just projections or just creations of your mind. And now we have dependent things or Shenwangs being described as deceptive. Why? Because the main Shenwang that we're concerned with is the tendency to hold things as self-existent, and that is a deceived state of mind. So we got deception with the constructs, and now we got deception with the cause things, the dependent things. Okay? 맞습니다.
다 제비 구조는 용도 것이야. 다 용도를 제비 구조 세워 가르스나 지단 용도 때 가상 양에 시에 버렸어요. 말아주 코나 용도 때 무슨도 또겐지 또니 무슨 또겐 뭐 그지 또가 나신지 다이에 라투와 말에 또배제 또 두고 말에 나도 또배 저도 메스 라고 코랑 용 코라 전담대바 체닝가 되는 시에도 저도 메비 체닝 있어 개중가 된 거는 저도 체닝이야. 그 저도 메스에 가르스나 무슨 또 또가 나신지 다이 라고도 말에 또배야 또도 많이 그러시는 저도 다 된다더라. 진짜 저도 매나 양 용도 되는 매나 용도를 민다게 알았어. 용도 돈이 전담대바 기신이 죄이신 다이닝 남다 다 민다 라초가 저 초가 저 초가 이제 근데지라서 뭐 다른 주도 근거
now we're talking about the third attribute or the third group of the MindOnly school. What is that?
Expression.
Yeah, you can call it expressions here, but expressions here refers to emptiness itself, to Yongdu, to totality. Okay, that's the group that's left over. Okay? Now, what the heck do they mean when they describe totality as being deceptive by referring to it as expressions? Okay, generally speaking, one of the 5 features of totality, one of the 5 features of emptiness, right, was that it was beyond expression. You know, it was said to be that thing which you couldn't express, right? Meaning that you can't really express it in words, and you can't even express it mentally. You know, I mean, you can't say in words. You can't sit down someone who hasn't seen emptiness directly and give them a precise or exact picture of what emptiness is simply in words. Okay, you can't do that. And neither can you describe to them so that they finally get a direct, correct, totally accurate picture of what emptiness is simply by describing it to them. You can't do that. In that sense, we can say that emptiness has one of those 5 characteristics features that we said that emptiness has, which was beyond description, okay? But still we go around saying, hey, listen, there's this thing called emptiness. There's this thing called totality. There's this thing called ultimate reality. There's this thing called ultimate truth. There's this thing called blah, 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 blah. You give it all these names. In that sense, it is japa. It is something which is expressed, okay? So in that sense, because it is given such a wide variety of names, not because you can describe it accurately, but because it's spoken of in so many ways, with so many expressions, you can call Yongdrup's totality, emptiness, what? That thing which is expressed. Okay, that thing which is expressed. And that's what the third deception refers to. The deception of expressions, meaning things which are expressed in many terms, meaning emptiness. Okay.
What is?
Jeopardy kunzob yopitso shena. That jeopardy Yongdrup la sigure di hakore.
Jeopardy mingi job.
Lane. Jaya yore. Yine kunzob imati.
Tana kindeji la sammadana kola kunzob mingi ta da khan. Kindeji la mingi sammadana kunzob mingi ta.
Lane.
Chita mingi ta je wala kanje kharaso re jujendo yodu chabada yamarwa. Enda kon kindeji la sammadana ne. Dai ju chita yage yarwa. Kunda siya kola dai tope ta batam jishane kunda chikta dai jo batam jishane yon kasa ti gana mate bache rangi tenyi tupe gana mate bache ne kunzob gana rosa charwa dai jo batam ji yu yi kunzob sin roko charwa watinde chila samlo tang ne jubi kunzob sin ko dai jo tu yota yakita drabu char
naso
kunda ti so topa ge ta batam dan dai jo batam chane tini kunzob sego chongwa
lane
ta drabu
naso I was kind of pushing Geshe-la to see, I understand why the word expression has been used to describe emptiness here, but why the word deception? You see what I mean? How does the word it's okay, but didn't we start out saying there's 3 kinds of deception, and the third one is called expressions, and in what way deceptive? Because you didn't cover that, and then he says, oh yeah. Think about the first kind of deception. What was that? Yeah, it applies to constructs. Deceptive, why? Because they are simply labeled with words. They are simply constructs of our thoughts and our words, okay? And in that sense, those are deceptive, okay? They are somehow hollow. They're not quite real. Why? Because they are simply constructs of thoughts and words. And if you think about it, in this description of Yongdrup, in this description of emptiness, it's very similar. Why? We can't really describe it accurately. We can't really think of it accurately, but we still give it all these names, don't we? We still talk about emptiness. We still talk about ultimate reality. We still talk about totality in the mind-only school system, right? But we're just playing with words. We're just giving words to something that we don't clearly comprehend or understand. So it's a parallel case here. In a sense, we are just making up a construct or an idea of what we think it is for something to exist empty, for what it means to be emptiness, right? We don't really have a clear, direct personal experience of it. So in that case, you can call it deceptive. In this sense also, expressions are deceptive, meaning they're forced, or they're artificial, or they're trying to describe something that we really don't understand or comprehend.
So it's only deception as far as it's a deception to the deceived state of mind?
In this case, emptiness is being described as involved with deception in that, as with constructs, it's only something that we can think about with flimsy mental pictures that don't describe accurately what it is. Okay, that's all. It's deceptive in that sense. Nothing. Yongdrup di kunzop di yutsu se di da kunzop se kola kunzop se goya di kunzop e lola nangwa yin san dinde rebes dinde ma re shu yin kai se ka ta kai shu kun dak da so nang xing dai da dan to pa tsam ki daba yinsa
Dora
daba chini kola jopa se di gyutsen yinsa they are chitang robs sene kunzop se chore
di ming ta dang kora tenda kora peja kora na la ro se yare
nare andasa
da le da ba ta ni xie ba de ti xin je ba ra ba yi ra ba sen de chang ma da ra ba de kunzo ming ta ye ding ar zo so de nam xia ra ba tam xi xi ba xin xie ba
you know, I was translating your comments to Geshe-la, you know, and saying, well, he asked if it was deceptive because it was involved with a deceptive state of mind, you know, and I said, well, not really. We were talking about how it was deceptive because, generally speaking, it was a figment or it was some kind of construct in a similar way to the way we do other constructs with our thoughts and words. Although, you know, it's just roughly like those other constructs. It's not really, you know, precisely like constructs, but roughly speaking, it bears some similarity to the method or the process by which we make constructs. So therefore, we can call it deceptive. He says, I like that word, roughly. Because I was using the Tibetan word for roughly. He says, hey, you know what? The text itself says roughly right here. You know, and then he points out that in the text itself, it uses the word rakpa, meaning, hey, these are not like precise definitions. Okay, we're just talking roughly. These things can be described as deceptive. Okay, he says the text itself, you know, Maitreya himself uses that word, you know, roughly. Okay.
콜로 바바다고 단주를 딱딱 해내 콜로 바바다고 되돌아야는 최탐제 랑기마 그 콘셉트 유 순거 최탐제 콘셉트 유스도 용도냐 콘셉트 유 순거라 다 셈담배 얘기할 용도 콘셉트 유 순에 된 뭐마치는 콘셉트 담바 인비잖아 콘셉트 유 순거 말해
나네
제피 콘셉트 텐데지라 투삼시에네 그 콘셉트 순거래 다 셈담배 야기 용도 콘서트 예세고 제비 콘서트 tel라 투삼 시에바래. 여기 공부하고
and then Jetsun Kappa himself takes off from the word roughly, 7th line on page 60, okay? He's saying that, you know, roughly speaking, you could talk about all three of the attributes or the groups of the mind-only school as being in some sense deceptive, okay? Very roughly, if we're talking very roughly, you can describe them in these three different ways. And it's not so hard to imagine with the deceptiveness of constructs, and it's not so hard to imagine with the deceptiveness of mind, meaning the deceived state of mind. But when you get to the third one, right, that's a little hard, right? And he says here, in the sutra, meaning during the second turning of the wheel, okay? In the sutra, the Buddha himself does describe, what's he say about all existing things? They exist deceptively. Okay? Is Yongdrup in the group of all existing things? Right? So can the Buddha, you know, is it accurate for the Buddha to say that emptiness itself is a deceptive reality? Huh? No, it's ultimate reality, right? Right? It's Tindam, it's not Kunzodama, right?
Just getting mixed up in the terminology.
Yeah, right, it's just terminology. So then Jetsun Kappa comes along and says, by the way, when the Buddha in the second turn of the wheel says that everything in the universe exists deceptively, he's talking about emptiness existing deceptively in the way that it's described here. When we say expressions exist deceptively, meaning deceptive only in the sense that we cannot describe it except with some flimsy fabrications of our mind. Okay, we can't describe it or think about it except through some kind of fake or flimsy constructs of our mind that don't really do it justice. You know, so in that sense, in the sense that Maitreya describes emptiness as being deceptive, in that same sense does Lord Buddha in the second turning of the wheel. Can Lord Buddha get away with saying everything in the universe exists deceptively. Because technically speaking, you can't say that about ultimate reality, about emptiness itself. Technically speaking, even in the second turning of the wheel, you have to say about ultimate reality that it is the one thing that exists ultimately. Okay? So that's when Kappa's wrap that up. Tomorrow we got a little bit more to go on this same subject. You know, we're about to hit a major division, but tomorrow morning we're gonna get dessert on this. You know, we're gonna wrap up this this issue with a little bit more stuff, and we'll stick it up and join it to this section. And then we'll go on to another major section. Okay. Bhakti Joshim Adotram Harira Bringshin Inde Gyambhadi Sangye Shindu Mite Ovagi Dokunanta Shina Chabashu Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamneya Tayami Dikevokun Sanam Yeshe Todoshin Sanam Yeshe Nachoe Tabakuni Tobasho. What's your name again? Hey, I'll do it.